The Zorathi delegation stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, their silver skin shimmering under the ancient lights that had burned for 10,000 years. Ambassador Crystal looked at the holographic display showing a small blue planet on the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm. The humans had finally achieved faster-than-light travel, and now the Council had to decide what to do with them. "They are primitive," said High Counselor Vethmer, his tentacles waving dismissively. "Their civilization is barely 12,000 years old. They still fight wars among themselves. They have no unified government. What could they possibly offer us?" Crystal had studied the humans for 3 years. He had watched their broadcasts, read their literature, and observed their strange behaviors. Something about them troubled him, but he could not say what it was. "They are different," Crystal said quietly. "I have studied many species in my time, but these humans are unlike anything I have seen before." The council chamber filled with sounds of amusement. The Veltrix clicked their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their kind. The Thornax rumbled deep in their stone bodies. Even the usually stoic Luminari flickered with colors that suggested mockery. "Different how?" asked Vethmer. "They are carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, water-dependent mammals. There are hundreds of similar species in the galaxy. The Keithrani are far older. The Zundar are more intelligent. The Morphax are more adaptable. What makes these humans special?" Hesitated. He had prepared many arguments about human technology, their rapid advancement, their surprising creativity. But those were not the things that truly made him uneasy. "Their gods," he said finally. "Have you looked at their gods?" The laughter stopped. Religion was not a topic the council discussed often. Most advanced species had abandoned such beliefs millions of years ago. It was considered a primitive stage of development, like tool-making or tribal organization. "What about their gods?" asked Counselor Yethna of the Luminari, her light dimming with curiosity. "They are strange," Crystal said. "Most primitive species create gods that are like themselves, only bigger and more powerful. Gods that rule from mountains or clouds, that demand worship and obedience, that punish and reward. The humans have such gods too, but they also have something else." He activated a new display, showing images and texts from human religious traditions around the world. "They have gods that die," Crystal said. "Gods that sacrifice themselves for their people. Gods that suffer, that weep, that feel pain. They have gods that love without condition, that forgive without limit. They have gods that ask nothing for themselves but give everything for others." The council was silent now. This was genuinely unusual. "And more than that," Crystal continued, "they have gods that were once ordinary humans. Men and women who lived and died, who struggled and failed, but who somehow became divine through their actions. Their religions teach that any human can become like a god through compassion, wisdom, and sacrifice." "Interesting anthropologically," Vethmer admitted. "But what does this have to do with first contact protocols?" "I do not know yet," Crystal said honestly. "But I believe we should proceed with caution. These humans believe in something that no other species in the galaxy believes. They believe that divinity is not something separate from ordinary life. They believe that the sacred and the mundane are connected. They believe that suffering has meaning and that love is stronger than death." "Primitive superstitions," said one of the Thornax delegates, his gravelly voice echoing in the chamber. "Perhaps," Crystal agreed. "But consider this. The humans have survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and the near extinction of their species many times. They have built great civilizations and watched them fall. They have created art and music and literature that serves no evolutionary purpose. They have walked on their moon and sent machines to the stars, all while still praying to gods they cannot see or prove." "What is your point?" Vethmer asked. "My point is that we do not understand them," Crystal said. "And anything we do not understand is potentially dangerous. I recommend we send a small delegation to make first contact, observe them carefully, and learn more before we make any decisions about integration into the galactic community. The council voted in favor of Crystal's proposal, though many still thought he was being overly cautious about a species that had only recently learned to leave their own solar system. 3 months later, Crystal led a delegation of 12 representatives to Earth. They landed in a field outside a small city, choosing to arrive during the night to minimize panic. But word spread quickly, and by morning, thousands of humans had gathered at the edge of the landing zone. The first human to approach the ship was not a military leader or a politician. It was an old woman in simple clothes, walking with a cane. She moved slowly through the crowd, which parted to let her pass, and stopped at the base of the ship. Crystal watched her on the external cameras, uncertain what to do. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. Where were the human authorities? Where were the weapons they expected to see? "I think we should go out and meet her," said Delegate Iris of the Luminari. "That is not protocol," Crystal replied. "No," Iris agreed, "but look at her, she is not afraid." It was true. The old woman stood calmly, waiting, as if she had been expecting them all her life. There was something in her face that could not read, an expression he had never seen on any alien species. Against his better judgment, Crystal activated the door and walked down the ramp. The crowd gasped but did not flee. The old woman smiled and reached out her hand. "Welcome to Earth," she said. "I am Maria. I used to be a nurse, but now I am retired. I live just over that hill. Would you like to come to my house for tea?" Stared at her. In 300 years of diplomatic service, he had never received such an invitation. First contact usually involved formal ceremonies, elaborate protocols, weeks of negotiation before anyone so much as shared a meal. We would be honored," he said, the translation device in his throat converting his words to human language. Maria nodded as if this was perfectly normal. "Good. My husband passed away last year and I have been lonely. It will be nice to have visitors." She turned and began walking toward the hill, looked back at his delegation, who seemed as confused as he was. Then he followed the old woman, leaving the protocols and ceremonies behind. The first thing Crystal noticed about Maria's house was that it was full of pictures. They covered every wall and surface, showing humans of all ages. Children laughing, couples embracing, old people sitting together in gardens. And in many of the pictures, Crystal saw small symbols he recognized from his research. Crosses, stars, crescents, wheels, religious icons. "Your family?" he asked. "Some of them," Maria said, putting water on to boil. "Others are people I knew, patients I cared for, friends who have passed on. I keep their pictures so I remember them." "Why?" Crystal asked. It was a strange concept. The Zorathi did not keep images of the dead. What purpose did it serve? Maria looked at him with an expression he was beginning to understand meant patience. "Because they mattered," she said simply. "Because they lived and loved and suffered and laughed. Because I want to remember their stories. Because someday someone will remember mine." She poured tea into small cups and sat down at her kitchen table, gesturing for Crystal to join her. He did, folding his long limbs awkwardly into a human chair. "You are not what I expected," he admitted. "We thought your leaders would meet us. We thought there would be fear, weapons, suspicion." Maria smiled. "Oh, there is plenty of that. But I am old and I have learned that fear is usually the wrong response to new things. When I was young, I was afraid of everything. The dark, strangers, dying. But then I became a nurse, and I saw people at their worst and their best, and I learned something important." "What did you learn?" "That most people at the end of their lives do not think about the things they were afraid of. They think about the people they loved. They think about the times they were brave, the times they were kind, the times they chose connection over protection." She took a sip of her tea. "So when I saw your ship land, I thought to myself, Maria, you are 87 years old. You have lived a good life. What is the worst that could happen? These visitors might kill you. But if they do not, you might make new friends. And at my age, new friends are worth more than safety." Crystal did not know what to say. This old woman had just summarized something profound about her species that all his research had failed to capture. Humans were afraid, yes, but they chose to act despite their fear. They reached out even when reaching out was dangerous. "Tell me about your gods," Crystal said impulsively. Maria raised her eyebrows. "That is a big question for tea time, but all right." She pointed to a small cross on her wall. "I am Christian. My God became a man, lived among the poor and sick, and was killed by the powerful. But before he died, he forgave the people who killed him. And after he died, his followers said he came back to life. Whether that is literally true, I do not know. I am old enough to be comfortable with mystery, but I believe in what he taught. Love your neighbor, care for the weak. Forgive those who hurt you. Die to yourself so that you can live for others." "Why would a god die for humans?" Crystal asked. It was the question that had troubled him most. Maria thought for a moment. "Because that is what love does," she said finally. "Love does not count the cost. Love gives everything. The parents who work themselves to exhaustion for their children, the doctors who risk disease to heal the sick, the soldiers who throw themselves on explosives to save their friends. They are all doing the same thing my God did. They are saying, 'Your life matters more than mine. You are worth dying for.'" Felt something strange in his chest. It was not a physical sensation but an emotional one, a kind of pressure that he did not understand. "We have no gods like that," he said quietly. "The Zorathi worshipped the stars once long ago. We believed they were the eyes of beings who watched us without caring. We learned to survive without their help, and eventually we stopped believing in them at all." Maria nodded slowly. "That is sad," she said. "Not because gods are real or not real, but because believing in something bigger than yourself, something worth dying for, gives life meaning. Without that, what do you have?" "Logic," Crystal said. "Science, reason. And are those enough to make you happy?" The question hit Crystal like a physical blow. He had never asked himself if he was happy. Happiness was not a concept the Zorathi valued. They valued efficiency, survival, the continuation of the species. But happiness? "I do not know," he admitted. Maria reached across the table and patted his silver hand. Her touch was warm and gentle. "Then maybe that is why you are here," she said. "Maybe the universe sent you to us so you could learn something. And maybe it sent you to me because I am old and have nothing left to fear and everything left to give." Outside, Crystal could hear more vehicles arriving, more humans gathering. Soon the authorities would come, the protocols would begin, and this strange moment of peace would end. But he knew that something had changed in him. Something had cracked open. He had come to Earth expecting to find primitives. Instead, he had found something else entirely. A species that believed in impossible things. A species that loved without reason. A species that faced death and chose compassion. And sitting in this small kitchen, drinking tea with an old woman who had welcomed him without fear, Crystal began to understand why the humans' gods were different. It was not because humans were more superstitious than other species. It was because they had looked into the darkness of the universe and chosen to create light. The other members of his delegation had remained by the ship, following protocol, waiting for official contact. But Crystal stayed in Maria's kitchen until the sun set, listening to her stories about the people in her pictures, the patients she had cared for, the husband she had loved for 60 years. And for the first time in his very long life, he began to wonder if there was something the humans knew that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. The news of alien contact spread across Earth in hours. By the next morning, every screen on the planet showed images of Crystal and his delegation meeting with world leaders in a hastily arranged ceremony. But the image that spread most quickly was a grainy photo taken by a neighbor, showing the silver-skinned ambassador sitting at Maria's kitchen table, drinking tea. The Galactic Council watched the events unfold with growing concern. This was not how first contact was supposed to work. The protocols existed for good reason. New species were supposed to be observed, evaluated, carefully introduced to the greater galactic community. Instead, the humans were treating the visitors like guests at a party. "They are giving interviews," reported Counselor Vethmer, his tentacles tight with frustration. "The human media is asking them questions about their home world, their technology, their beliefs, and Crystal is answering them. He is telling them everything." "Has he mentioned our military capabilities?" asked the Thornax delegate. "No, but he has spoken extensively about our philosophies, our histories, our gods or lack thereof. The humans are fascinated. They want to know how other species understand existence." This was perhaps the strangest thing of all. Other new species, when contacted, immediately asked about technology and resources. How fast were galactic ships? What weapons did they carry? What could be gained from alliance or trade? The humans asked these questions too, of course. Their governments were particularly interested in practical matters, but their ordinary citizens seemed more curious about meaning. What did the aliens believe? What did they value? What made their lives worth living? Crystal found himself spending most of his time with Maria and her friends, a group of elderly humans who gathered at her house every afternoon to drink tea and discuss philosophy. They called themselves the Thursday Circle, though they met every day now that aliens were visiting. "Tell us about your afterlife," said Thomas, a retired professor of comparative religion. He had white hair and kind eyes, and he approached the aliens with the same curiosity he had brought to his decades of studying human faiths. "We have no afterlife," Crystal said. "The Zorathi believe that consciousness ends with biological death. We preserve our knowledge in databases, our genetic material in vaults, but the individual self ceases to exist." "How terribly lonely," said Margaret, a former social worker who had spent her life helping families in crisis. "To face that void with nothing to hope for." "We do not experience it as lonely," Crystal said, though he was no longer certain this was true. "We experience it as acceptance. The universe is vast and indifferent. We are small and temporary. Accepting this is wisdom." "But is it happiness?" Thomas asked, echoing Maria's question from that first day. The other members of the delegation had scattered across the planet, meeting with scientists and leaders, establishing formal diplomatic channels. But Crystal kept returning to Maria's house. He told himself it was for research, to understand human psychology more deeply. But the truth was simpler. He felt something in their presence that he had never felt before. "May I ask you something?" said Maria one afternoon, as the autumn leaves fell outside her window. "Of course. Why did you choose to study us? Out of all the species you could have researched, why humans?" Considered the question carefully. "I saw one of your broadcasts," he said finally. "A documentary about a hospital. There was a doctor who worked 20-hour shifts to save children she would never meet again. There was a janitor who held the hands of dying patients because their families could not be there. There was a chaplain who sat with people of every faith and no faith, helping them make sense of their suffering." He paused, remembering the images that had haunted him for months. "In my world, such behavior would be considered irrational. Why spend your finite energy on strangers? Why sacrifice your own well-being for people who cannot repay you? But these humans did it anyway. And when I looked at their faces, I saw something I did not recognize. Later, I learned the word for it: joy." Maria smiled. "That is what our gods teach us," she said. "That giving is more blessed than receiving. That loving your neighbor is the path to loving yourself. That the way to find your life is to lose it." "It makes no sense," Crystal said. "No," Maria agreed. "It is not supposed to make sense. It is supposed to make us better." The weeks passed, and Crystal's reports to the Galactic Council became increasingly unusual. Instead of statistics and strategic assessments, he wrote about human funerals and weddings. He described their art and music, the way they gathered in buildings to sing together, the way they told stories to their children about heroes who sacrificed themselves for others. "He has lost his objectivity," Counselor Vethmer complained. "He has gone native, as the humans would say." "Perhaps," said Yethna of the Luminari, "but his reports are the most interesting things I have read in centuries. Listen to this." She began to glow with the soft colors of contemplation as she read from Crystal's latest transmission. "The humans have a concept they call grace. It means receiving good things that you have not earned and do not deserve. Their religions teach that the universe is fundamentally gracious, that existence itself is a gift. This is the opposite of what we believe in the Council. We believe that existence is a burden, that resources must be fought for, that survival is the only value. But the humans believe they were made for something more than survival. They believe they were made to love and be loved. And this belief shapes everything they do." The council chamber was silent. "I have spent 300 years serving the Galactic Council," Yethna continued reading. "I have visited 1,000 worlds and met 10,000 species. I have seen empires rise and fall, stars born and dying. I thought I understood existence. I thought wisdom meant accepting the cold logic of a universe without meaning. But these humans, these primitive, short-lived, irrational creatures, have shown me something I never expected. They have shown me that meaning is not found but made. That love is not weakness but strength. That the gods we create reveal the gods we wish we had. And perhaps, just perhaps, wishing for something beautiful is the first step toward making it real." "He has gone mad," said the Thornex delegate. "Perhaps," Yethna said again, "or perhaps he has found something we lost long ago." On Earth, Crystal had stopped sending reports entirely. He had requested extended leave from his diplomatic duties, and the Council, uncertain what to do with him, had granted it. He spent his days with the Thursday Circle, learning about human religions from Thomas, hearing stories about human kindness from Margaret, and sitting in comfortable silence with Maria as the seasons changed outside her window. "You are different now," Maria said one evening. "When you first arrived, you held yourself like you were carrying something heavy. Now you seem lighter." "I am learning to hope," Crystal said. "It is a strange feeling. My species does not have a word for it. The closest translation would be something like irrational optimism about uncertain outcomes. We consider it a flaw." Maria laughed. "Hope is not irrational. Hope is what keeps us going when logic says we should give up. Hope is what makes us try again after we fail, love again after we lose, live again after we die inside." She paused. "Hope is how humans touch the divine." "I would like to understand your gods better," Crystal said. "Not just academically, truly understand." "Then you must do what my gods ask," Maria said. "Love someone without expecting anything in return. Forgive someone who has hurt you. Give your life for something bigger than yourself." "Those things are easy to say and hard to do." "Yes," Maria agreed. "That is why they matter." The crisis came 6 months after first contact. A mining accident in South America trapped 43 workers underground. The tunnel had collapsed, and rescue teams estimated it would take 3 weeks to dig them out. The trapped miners had food and water for 10 days. Crystal watched the news coverage with the Thursday Circle, seeing the faces of the miners' families as they held vigil above the buried chamber. Children holding candles, elderly parents clutching rosaries, spouses and siblings refusing to sleep, refusing to leave, refusing to give up. "This is irrational," Crystal said. "The mathematics are clear. Many of those miners will die before rescue is possible. Why do the families not accept this and move on with their lives?" Maria looked at him with something like disappointment. "Because they love them," she said. "Because love does not do mathematics. Because hope is not about probability. It is about faith." "Faith in what?" "Faith that miracles are possible. Faith that human beings can achieve the impossible when they care enough to try. Faith that the universe is not just random matter and energy, but something more, something that responds to love. Crystal watched as volunteers from around the world began arriving at the mine site. Engineers, doctors, rescue specialists, and thousands of ordinary people who just wanted to help. They worked around the clock, barely sleeping, pushing their bodies past exhaustion. "I could help," Crystal said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. "Zorathi technology could stabilize the tunnel," he explained. "Our force fields could create a safe passage in hours instead of weeks. I could save them." "But that would violate your protocols," Thomas said. "First contact rules prohibit sharing advanced technology with new species." "Yes," Crystal said, "it would." He stood up and walked to the door. Then he paused and looked back at Maria, the old woman who had welcomed him without fear, who had taught him about gods who die for love. "I am beginning to understand," he said. He returned to his ship and activated the communication system. Within hours, he had assembled a team of Zorathi engineers and transported them to the mine site. They worked alongside the human rescue crews, sharing technology that should have remained secret for decades. The council was furious. They demanded Crystal's recall. They threatened to abandon first contact entirely. But by then, it was too late. The force fields had been deployed, the tunnel had been stabilized, and 39 of the 43 miners emerged alive to embrace their families. The images spread across the galaxy faster than official communications. Aliens and humans working together. Silver-skinned beings and brown-skinned beings, carrying injured workers to safety. A Zorathi engineer embracing a human child who had thought her father was lost forever. And everywhere the images appeared, beings of 1,000 species asked the same question. Why? Why had the aliens risked so much for beings they barely knew? Crystal gave his answer in a broadcast that reached every corner of civilized space. "I came to Earth expecting to find primitives," he said. "Instead, I found teachers. These humans believe in things that seem impossible. They believe that love is stronger than death, that hope is stronger than despair, that sacrifice is stronger than self-preservation. They believe in gods who suffer with them, who die for them, who love them without condition. And I have learned that these beliefs are not primitive superstitions. They are the most advanced technology in the universe. They are the technology of the soul." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "The humans have shown me that existence can have meaning, that the cold logic of survival is not the highest wisdom, that reaching out to strangers, risking everything for love, choosing hope over fear, these are not weaknesses but strengths. These are the things that make life worth living." Maria watched the broadcast with tears streaming down her face. Beside her, the Thursday Circle sat in silence, overwhelmed by what they were witnessing. "He has become one of us," Margaret whispered. "No," Maria said softly. "He has become something more. He has become what we all hope to be." Across the galaxy, beings who had never questioned the cold logic of survival began to feel something stirring in themselves. It was uncomfortable and strange, like a muscle they had forgotten they possessed. But it was also familiar, as if they had known it once, long ago, before they became advanced and logical and empty. It was hope, and it was just beginning. The years that followed first contact transformed the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. Species that had existed in isolation for millions of years began reaching out to each other. Trade routes expanded, alliances formed, and cultural exchange programs connected beings across vast distances of space. But the most significant change was philosophical. On Zorathi's prime, the silver-skinned beings who had abandoned religion countless generations ago began to ask new questions. Young Zorathi gathered in secret to discuss concepts their elders considered dangerous. Love, faith, sacrifice, hope. They read human literature and watched human films and listened to human music. They wondered what it would feel like to believe in something worth dying for. The council watched these developments with alarm. They called it the human contagion, this spreading infection of irrational belief. They passed laws restricting access to human cultural exports. They censored broadcasts from Earth. They recalled ambassadors and severed diplomatic ties. None of it worked. The ideas had taken root too deeply. Across 1,000 worlds, beings were discovering something they had lost or never known. They were discovering their souls. Had returned to Earth after his trial before the Council. They had stripped him of his rank and banished him from Zorathi space, declaring him a traitor to his species. He had accepted the judgment calmly and traveled back to the small blue planet where an old woman had changed his life. Maria's house had become a pilgrimage site. Beings from dozens of worlds came to see the place where first contact had truly begun, not in the formal ceremonies, but in a kitchen where an alien learned to drink tea. Maria herself had grown frailer in the years since that first meeting. She was 92 now, and she knew her time was short. But she still hosted the Thursday Circle, still welcomed strangers from across the stars, still taught the simple lessons she had learned from a lifetime of loving others. "Tell me about heaven," asked Iris, the Luminary delegate who had first suggested Crystal meet Maria. She had resigned from the council to study human spirituality and now lived on Earth permanently, her light shifting through colors of wonder whenever she learned something new. Maria smiled from her chair by the window. Different religions describe it differently. Some say it is a place of eternal joy. Others say it is union with the divine. Still others say it is simply being with the ones you love forever. "Which do you believe?" Iris asked. "I believe that heaven is not so much a place as a state of being. I believe we touch heaven every time we truly love, every time we forgive, every time we put someone else's needs before our own. I believe that the moments when we feel most connected to others and to something greater than ourselves, those are glimpses of eternity." "That sounds like what the Luminary used to believe," Iris said, her light dimming to soft contemplation. "Before we evolved beyond such needs, before we became pure energy and logic, we used to believe that connection was the purpose of existence. Then we decided that efficiency was more important." "And were you happier then?" Maria asked. Iris was silent for a long moment. "I do not know, I cannot remember what happiness felt like. But since coming to Earth, since learning from you and your friends, I have begun to feel something. A warmth, a sense of belonging, a feeling that my existence matters not because of what I accomplish but because of who I love." "That is happiness," Maria said simply. "That is what the gods want for us." The word spread from world to world. Human missionaries did not need to travel to alien planets. Their ideas traveled on their own, carried by beings who had encountered Earth culture and been transformed. On Thornax, the stone beings who had worshipped logic for millions of years began to carve new temples. Not temples to equations or proofs, but temples to love, where beings could come to remember what mattered most. Among the Keithrani, who had achieved immortality through technology but lost the will to live, young philosophers began to argue that death gave life meaning. They studied human literature about sacrifice and discovered that some things were worth dying for. The Morphax, who could take any shape, began to question why they always chose forms designed for efficiency. Some began shaping themselves to express beauty, emotion, connection. They became artists, and their art explored the human concepts of grace and redemption. Even the cold mathematicians of the Void Collective, beings of pure thought who had eliminated emotion millions of years ago, found themselves troubled by human ideas. If existence had no inherent meaning, as they had always believed, then why did the humans seem so much more alive than they were? Crystal traveled among these worlds, no longer as an ambassador but as a teacher. He shared what he had learned from Maria and the Thursday Circle. He spoke about gods who suffered, about love that conquered death, about hope that defied logic. I do not ask you to believe in human religions, he said to gatherings of thousands. I do not ask you to accept their gods as literal truth. I ask only that you consider what these beliefs reveal about what humans want the universe to be. They want meaning. They want love. They want their suffering to have purpose. And perhaps, just perhaps, wanting these things is the first step toward creating them. The message resonated in ways Crystal had never expected. Beings who had thought themselves beyond such primitive needs discovered that they were not. The ache was still there, buried under millions of years of evolution and advancement. The hunger for something more than survival, more than efficiency, more than cold logic. They began to call it the awakening. Not a religious movement exactly, but a philosophical revolution. A galaxy that had lost its soul was beginning to find it again. Maria did not live to see the full flowering of what she had started. She died peacefully on a spring morning, surrounded by humans and aliens who had loved her. Crystal held her hand as she passed, feeling her warmth fade but her impact remain. "Thank you," he whispered, though he did not know if she could hear him. "Thank you for teaching me to hope." They built a memorial where her house had stood. A simple garden where beings of any species could come to remember the old woman who had changed the galaxy by offering a stranger a cup of tea. The inscription carved into the stone was from one of her favorite human prayers, chosen by the Thursday Circle to honor her memory. "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy." Beings from 1,000 worlds came to read those words. Many did not understand them at first, but something in the simple prayer spoke to a longing they had forgotten they possessed. And one by one, they began to learn what Maria had known all along. That the purpose of existence is not to survive, but to love. That the greatest power in the universe is not technology, but compassion. That the gods we create reveal the beings we hope to become. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe sends us exactly the teachers we need. 10 years after Maria's death, the Galactic Council convened for a special session. The chamber that had once been filled with mockery of human primitives was now decorated with symbols from 100 spiritual traditions. Crosses and crescents, stars and wheels, alongside new symbols created by species that had rediscovered their souls. High Counselor Vethmer had retired long ago, replaced by a young Zorathi named Crystal. The same Crystal who had been banished and condemned, now restored to honor and given the highest position the galaxy could offer. "We are gathered today to make a historic announcement," Crystal said, his silver skin gleaming in the light of symbols he had once thought primitive. "For the first time in galactic history, the Council is officially recognizing the spiritual dimension of existence." The chamber erupted in sounds of celebration. Clicks and rumbles and flashes of light, all expressing joy in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade before. "This does not mean we are endorsing any particular religion or requiring anyone to believe anything," Crystal continued. "It means we are acknowledging what the humans taught us, that logic and science, as wonderful as they are not enough to make life worth living, that beings of any species need meaning, purpose, connection, that the questions of why we exist and how we should live are not primitive concerns to be evolved beyond but essential inquiries that define who we are." He paused, looking out at the diverse assembly of beings who had gathered from across the stars. "The humans have many gods," he said. "Gods who suffer, gods who sacrifice, gods who love without condition. For years, we dismissed these beliefs as superstition, but we have learned that we were wrong. Not because these gods are literally real, but because the belief in them makes the humans better than they would otherwise be. The belief in something worth dying for teaches them how to truly live. The belief in unconditional love teaches them how to truly give. The belief in sacrifice teaches them what truly matters." He thought of Maria, of her small house and her pictures of loved ones, of her cups of tea and her simple lessons about grace. And so, in honor of all the humans who have taught us to hope, the Galactic Council is establishing a new institution. We are calling it the Church of Universal Love. Not a church in the human sense, with dogmas and rituals that exclude. A church that welcomes all beings, all beliefs, all ways of reaching toward the divine. A church that teaches only this, that love is the highest law, that sacrifice is the greatest honor, and that hope is the most powerful force in the universe. The celebration lasted for days. Beings who had never met embraced each other. Songs were sung in languages that had no words for music until the humans arrived. And somewhere, in a small garden on a small blue planet, the spirit of an old woman smiled at what her cup of tea had wrought. The Church of Universal Love spread faster than any religion in galactic history. It had no central authority, no required beliefs, no strict doctrines. It was simply a gathering of beings who wanted to be better than they were, who wanted to love more than they did, who wanted to hope in a universe that had seemed cold and empty for so long. Ministers of the church came from every species. A Thornax who had once worshipped pure logic now taught meditation and compassion. A Luminari who had once believed emotion was weakness now shone with the light of unconditional love. A Morphax who had once valued only efficiency now shaped herself into forms that expressed beauty and grace. And they all told the same story. The story of how humanity, the youngest species in the galaxy, the primitives who still fought among themselves, had taught the ancient and advanced races what they had forgotten. That gods who suffer are stronger than gods who rule. That love that gives is richer than love that takes. That hope that defies logic is wiser than wisdom that accepts despair. They called it the human gospel, and it became the foundation of a new galactic civilization. Not an empire built on conquest or technology, but a community built on compassion and connection. On Earth, humans barely noticed the revolution they had caused. They were too busy being human, loving and fighting, creating and destroying, hopping and despairing as they always had. But something had changed. They knew now that they were not alone in the universe, and they knew that the universe, against all odds, was learning to love. Crystal visited Earth one last time, 50 years after first contact. He was old now, even by Zorathi standards, and he knew his time was short. He went to Maria's garden and sat among the flowers, remembering the old woman who had changed his life. The memorial had grown over the decades, surrounded now by additions from thousands of species. Each had left something to honor the human who had taught them all. A Thornax stone inscribed with the word hope in their ancient language. A luminary light that never dimmed, symbolizing eternal love. A Morphax sculpture that shifted through 1,000 forms, each one expressing gratitude. And simple human flowers, planted by the children of the Thursday Circle, still growing after all these years. "Thank you," Crystal whispered again, as he had whispered 50 years before. "Thank you for teaching us that we were not as advanced as we thought. Thank you for showing us that the primitives were wiser than the ancients. Thank you for giving us back our souls." He sat in the garden until the sun set, thinking about gods who suffer and love that conquers death and hope that defies logic. He thought about all the beings across all the worlds who had been transformed by human ideas. He thought about the future, the centuries of discovery and growth that lay ahead. And he smiled, because he knew the truth that Maria had known all along. That the universe is not cold and empty, but warm and full. That existence is not a burden to be endured, but a gift to be celebrated. That the gods we create reveal the gods we wish we had. And that wishing for something beautiful is the first step toward making it real. He died that night peacefully in the garden of the woman who had changed everything. And as his consciousness faded, he thought he saw Maria waiting for him, still wearing her simple clothes, still smiling her gentle smile. "Welcome," she said, just as she had welcomed him on that first day. Would you like some tea?" And Crystal, the alien who had learned to hope, followed her into whatever came next, trusting that love would light the way. Across the galaxy, beings of every species paused that night, feeling something shift in the fabric of existence. They did not know what had happened, but they knew it was significant. Something had ended and something had begun. In the Church of Universal Love, they called it the Ascension, the moment when Crystal joined Maria in whatever heaven existed for those who truly loved, the moment when the gospel he had helped to spread became complete. And in the years that followed, when beings asked why aliens now prayed to human gods, they were told a simple story. Once upon a time, visitors from the stars came to a small blue planet. They expected to find primitives with primitive beliefs. Instead, they found teachers with timeless wisdom. They found an old woman who welcomed strangers without fear. They found gods who suffered and loved and died and rose again. They found hope. And the galaxy was never the same.